Story 1. My Spanish teacher was not very good at her job. It took 3 years, and all I can do is ask where the library and bathrooms are in Spanish. She was very good at berating us and giving us life lessons. For example, I once had a pen break in the class before, and it left me without a writing utensil, and so I asked to borrow one. The entirety of our 45-minute class was a lecture on how in the real world forgetting wouldn't fly. Anyway, I played football and had a few teammates in class, and the year before this, I sat behind a girl 1 year ahead of me, and we caused trouble quite a bit, so I was automatically on her crap list. Some of my teammates decided since the answer book was on her desk, they would abscond with it for a bit, write down all of the answers to the upcoming quiz, and just copy the answers back onto the quiz. This cheat sheet was offered to me, and I declined. I actually wanted to learn. Well, their scheme worked, until she began to grade them near the end of the class. Half of the answers were, "Answers may vary" in Spanish, and my dumb teammates didn't bother to figure this out. Once she figured out it was the football guys, I think 3 or 4, not including me, were the culprits, she sent all of the players into the hall, called the principal down, and began requesting write-ups. I walked back into the classroom, grabbed my stuff, and started toward my locker that was only a few feet away. I'm being yelled at by both teacher and principal now, and after finishing putting my stuff away, all I said was, "You might want to actually check my exam before we continue on. I'm going to lunch." I never received an apology of any kind. Story 2. Won't give her real name, so we shall call her Gordon Ramsay's grandma, aka GRG. GRG was an old witch who should have retired years ago and had anger issues. She was furious when she learned I didn't use a gas cooker at home. Electric was cheaper, so didn't know how to immediately fire one up on the first lesson. I was about 10 years old. This woman would bellow at me from across the room. As a sensitive, people-pleasing kid, I was a blubbering, trembling mess each lesson because I was petrified of making mistakes and her shouting at me. One day I was running behind. I always ran behind. And she took my food out of the oven, cakes on a baking tray, and reached to grab something and accidentally brushed against her arm. This witch, literally screaming, grabbed my wrist and pressed my palm against the baking tray. The baking tray that had just come out of a 200-degree oven. Only for a split second. Didn't hold it there or anything, but it was enough to blister my skin. One day, I couldn't face going to her class, so I feigned illness and was kept off school. One of my classmates told me apparently during registration roll call, when they told her I was off sick, GRG laughed and said, "No, she isn't. She's just scared of me." Nice to see you were so self-aware, witch. I never reported it directly, but I did tell my mom, who demanded the school do something about it. We had a meeting with the head of year, who laughed it off, saying, "She's a good teacher, she just doesn't like the quiet ones." Nothing was done. If the crusty cow is still alive, she'll be in the Guinness World Records. Rotten hell, GRG. You saw a shy kid, and instead of building up her confidence and patiently teaching her a valuable life skill, you decided to bully her and drag her self-esteem down to rock bottom's basement. It took me ages to learn how to cook because of you. Thankfully, I got my confidence back, and now enjoy cooking. Story 3. I had left my calculator on my desk in physics class, and the teacher took it. I had engraved my initials on it, so it was unmistakable. My problem with this was that he always asked me during class if I had my calculator, and I told him I still couldn't find it. The end of the school year came around, and another student was snooping through his desk and found my calculator. All year, that a-hole was giving me a 0 for the day because I didn't have it. Story 4. High school psychology teacher evaluated me in front of the entire class as mentally troubled and told everyone that I'm an undiagnosed ADD case with 99% certainty. And because she was a psych teacher, everyone took her word for it. Yeah, thanks for making everyone think I was mental throughout high school and giving me nagging self-doubts if I really did have ADD for most of my 20s, until I got that medically ruled out. I wasn't always the best behaved kid, and even back then I understood that, but that's pretty harsh of her. Story 5. Alright, so this is something that really had me angry as a kid, and every time I think about it, I get fired up. I was in third grade. The second, third, and fourth graders were doing a week of square dance. Then at the end of the week on Friday, we were going to have a recital and do a performance. Sadly, I was leaving for vacation, and that would be starting that Friday, so I couldn't be in the recital. Oh well, I could still enjoy the square dance and have some fun with the rest of the classes, right? No. My teacher made me sit in the classroom alone while everyone was across the hall in the big classroom doing the dances. She made me do freaking vocabulary words for hours while I had to sit in a darkened room, alone, listening to the muffled sounds of Cotton Eye Joe stomping and laughing coming from the hallway. I was so annoyed. I was crying every day. I begged her to just let me sit in there. I offered to clap, help with music, hold up a sign, just sit in the corner, anything to be a part of it. But no, I had to sit alone, no lights, and do vocabulary words with tears just running down on the paper, for 4 days straight. She basically punished me with in-school suspension for not being able to be at the recital due to my family vacation. I freaking hate that bee to this day. Something similar happened to me in third grade. I was punished for clowning around in PE. The coach had me stand forehead against the wall, staring straight ahead for the entire duration of the 45-minute class, while I could hear kids playing and laughing in the background. If he caught me moving from the position, I was yelled at, threatened, and berated. Okay, fine. But the only problem was that this went on for 5 days a week for the next 3 or 4 months until school finally let out. Like clockwork. PE time, put your face against the wall, don't speak, stand there until the bell rings. It was horrible psychologically. Tears would be streaming down my eyes, intense loneliness, and I lost all interest in going to school at all that semester. Crazy thing is, I never told my parents or teacher what was happening. I really thought it was all my fault, and this was the price to pay. As an adult, I now realize what an abusive, racist, POS person that coach was. Story 6. I was little, probably kindergarten age. We were near the end of the school year, and we were having a raffle for gifts to take into summer. The top gift was a hella cool bike, and I, being from a very poor family, could only dream of such a thing. Anyway, a little girl is brought up and is given a bucket filled with slips of paper, upon which were written the names of each student. She stirred her little hands around briefly, plucked a piece of paper, and raised it to the light. I clearly saw my name written in reverse through the light shining overhead, so I knew my name had been the first drawn, and thus the top prize, the bike, was mine. Well, the teacher overseeing the draw didn't like me very much because my family was poor. So a second after the paper was raised up, she slapped the paper gently out of the drawer's hand, stirred her own hand around in the bucket, clearly reading the names as she did, and plucked another name. Lo and behold, the new name belonged to the popular classmate with rich parents. I wish I was effing kidding. The teacher even maintained eye contact with me as she smiled thinly, and the winner scurried up to get her bike. That's when I knew life wasn't fair. F you, Miss Simmons. Story 7. I will never forget sitting in a circle in third grade while we were taking turns reading to the class from our readers. I struggled to be able to follow along with listening plus pacing. It helped greatly to follow the spoken words with the hovering tip of my pencil. That day, I dropped my pencil while turning the page. It rolled a little, and took me a moment to bend down and grab it, plus catching back up in the text. The circle arrangement of desks meant I couldn't just get out of my seat to retrieve the pencil. It took a moment of foot gymnastics to retrieve it without bothering my neighbor to shimmy their desk. Teacher sees me as I settle back in with my retrieved pencil. She stops the current reader and accuses me of not paying attention. Before I could try and articulate what had just happened, she demanded, "What is a steer?" That seemed odd. A steer? I'd never heard steering used like that, and tried to choke out a confused response that a steer must be something to do with a direction, like you'd turn a steering wheel. I will never forget the student next to me screaming laughing, "A steering wheel?" while the teacher berated me for such a dumb answer. Readers, the story we had just begun was about a farm. It had steer in the title, and I think the titular character was like Stanley the Steer. Never in my life had I heard cattle referred to as steer, and as we had just started the story, I hadn't yet made the connection between Stanley and the steer from the title. I'm almost 40 and I still get sassed about that. Screw me for trying to succeed at reading on my own and being ridiculed for not knowing a word but trying. Why not just pile it on instead of using this as a learning moment about context or even compassion in helping others share knowledge instead of picking on someone for not knowing something? Story 8. My final year of secondary school, I finally buckled down and started really making an effort to correct both my grades and my behavior. I was an immature little kid back then. Every teacher recognized it. My report card was basically full of compliments about how much I'd improved. Even my headmaster wrote a really nice paragraph about how proud he was. And that guy only gave compliments if you really earned them. All except for one teacher. I quote, "Zerby would rather play with computers than concentrate on schoolwork. I passed her class, I got good grades, I never caused her any issues. She viewed computers as unnecessary and having no place in education, and me spending my lunch breaks in the IT lab as playing with computers. She'd often come into the lab and berate us for not spending our time doing homework. I was doing homework, some of it even hers. Guess what? I've been in the IT industry my entire career, and playing with computers never did me any harm. She was just a bitter old teacher who didn't like change." Story 9. I got a lower score on a test in my senior college biology class. The professor offered extra credit in the form of going to the lab for 3-hour sessions, so I went to all of them. And then, at the end of the semester, he didn't give me all the extra credit. He capped it so I was within a point of an A. And no, it wasn't capped at one session. There was no rhyme or reason. He literally only gave me enough extra credit to get to that high B. I went to the dean and was told he had tenure, so there was nothing he could do about it. I was also told I should be happy because more than 50% of his students failed his class regularly. If that's the case, it sounds like something is wrong with the teacher, not the class. Anyway, it was my only B in college, and that pissed me off knowing I had worked and earned the A. So I graduated with a 3.99 GPA. Doesn't matter now in the scheme of things, but it still pisses me off thinking about it. Story 10. I was studying drama and was really gunning hard to get into drama schools to be a professional stage actor. For one reason or another, my personal tutor just hated me. She was always harsh and very dismissive. We argued over something in class, and she said something along the lines of, "You'll never achieve your dreams of being an actor. You'll never get anywhere in life." As much as I tried for 3 years, I did not get accepted into any of the London drama schools I auditioned for. I did give up on my dream and studied English Lit instead. She was right, but boy was she a witch. Story 11. Went on a rant about how much she hates emo music and fashion while I was sitting right there in front of her looking as emo as one could possibly imagine. Then when I came home, I changed my profile picture on Facebook to something super emo and captioned it with, "For my English teacher who hates emos." I didn't think she would see it. I didn't think anything of it. I meant it more as a joke, but she did somehow see it and apologized to me the next day. Story 12. Oh boy. In 11th grade at my school, we had to take a mandatory road safety class with a person we'll call K. K wasn't a teacher, but a person who was involved in a car accident years ago and was left with permanent conditions and injuries. Almost nobody gave a crap about his class, and usually over 80% would skip it. It was only me and a dedicated few who would actually show up and take notes. Most of what he taught was either anecdotes or basic things you learn when getting a driver's license. Principal took notes, and together those two made up a midterm exam, to which you had to show up with the notebook you took notes in. I'm not sure what went down during that exam, but I am convinced ultimately most didn't have a sad notebook. I was sick that day and showed up on an alternate date to take that stupid exam. Me and several others in the same situation showed up to take the exam. Me with the notebook, mind you. I went over to Kay to say hello and ask where we will be taking the exam, and he accused me of never showing up to his class, saying if I did, he'd remember me, to which I said I did, and even showed him the notebook and let him read through it. Even then, Kay wasn't convinced. We, about 7 students, took the exam, and when I handed mine in with other students still in the room, He started going through my answers, pointing out any mistakes out loud by exclaiming that if I indeed attended his class, I'd know the answers, and reinforced his position that I cut his class. I was more than pissed. So were my parents when I told them. We went to the principal with it, and the best she offered was changing my grade to the equivalent of B+ and an apology. I never got said apology. F you, K. Story 13. At the end of my first week at a new school, the teacher handed out slips of paper with our current grade. I had a solid A at my old school, but the teacher said I had an F. I asked her why. She said I didn't hand in the quarter project. I reminded her I had just moved to the school. She said she would give me the weekend to do it. The project was to interview a longtime local resident and write a paper about their experiences. The articles were being collected for a book she was writing. I failed the class. Story 14. One of my high school art classes was called 3D design, which was basically clay, sculpting, and various three-dimensional artwork. On the first day of class, my teacher pulled me aside and told me she looked at my schedule, which was mostly honors and advanced level classes. She said that because I was clearly such a good student, she would grade me on a much harsher scale and would hear none of my objections that being book smart doesn't translate to artistic abilities. The poor marks I received in that class skewed my GPA. Story 15. Math teacher decided to assign me to one task. I had to solve it in front of my whole class. I did. I was pretty confident the answer was correct. Then she checked it, went full crazy mode, and made fun of me for about 5 minutes, called me silly words, and was rewarded with a juicy bad grade. Then she proceeded to show the entire class how it should be done. She did it exactly the same, just like I did 5 minutes earlier. Some of my classmates told her about it. She was like, "Oh, y'all distracted me." She never spoke to me directly after that. Story 16. Was talking early on into a physics class in middle school at 15 years old. Got admonished for it, which was understandable, even if I wasn't being particularly loud compared to several others. But when I said sorry, the guy answered with this beauty of a response. Sorry is what you say when you get your girlfriend pregnant. I was maybe moments away from just leaving the classroom. Such a weird and kinda messed up thing to say to a teenager. I already didn't like the guy, starting from the first lesson. The only reason I stayed was because he'd be leaving soon anyway. Guy was a reservist in the army, and was going to be deployed to the Middle East. Story 17. Had a teacher who repeatedly dress-coded me for things that weren't even in the rule book. She had the audacity to call it water under the bridge when I confronted her years later as an adult. No, witch, it's not water under the bridge. You don't get to mistreat someone and call it water under the bridge. That phrase is reserved solely for victims who have decided to forgive their abusers, and I don't forgive grown adults who bully children. She actively disrupted my education by sending me out of the classroom multiple times just because she doesn't like goth kids or the clothes they wear. The only skin exposed was my face and hands. This was during my trips and a hoodie even in the summer phase. Story 18. I had my grades docked severely for absences, regardless of test performance, despite the fact that my absences should have been clearly a sign to call the social services and get me the F out of my home. This included being failed for courses where I did significantly well on a test. I was also kicked out of school after I had taken absences within rule-permitted amounts in the following fashion. A bunch of teachers declared during a single day that I had gone over the maximum amount of absences for their courses, and would thus fail the courses regardless of performance or actual number of absences. Then, during summer vacation, a surprise letter came from the principal's office, stating that, due to not finishing those courses, it was deemed unlikely I'd finish the school in the planned time, and was kicked out. This was regardless of more severe cases being exempt. I didn't really question authorities at the time, nor was I cognizant of the fact that the social support system in hillbilly areas is more a bureaucratic good old boys for tax-paid jobs and influence.